Obadiah Hakeswill. Now, there's always a villain in the Sharpe book, but Obadiah Hakeswill is the best villain I've ever written. He was an evil, horrible man.
Few villains in television history have been as terrifying or as unforgettable as Obadiah Hakeswill. Played with chilling brilliance by Pete Postlethwaite, Hakeswill isn't just Sharpe's enemy, he's his nightmare made flesh. A man who thrives on cruelty, survives by deceit, and twists faith into madness. In Bernard Cornwell's novels and the ITV series alike, Hakeswill represents the rot at the heart of the army. From the very first moments he slithers onto the page and screen, twitching and muttering half prayers and half curses, it's clear we're not dealing with a simple antagonist. Hakeswill is something deeper, a symbol of institutional evil, and the psychological scars left by a lifetime of brutality. So, let's look at the story of Obadiah Hakeswill, the soldier, the sadist, and the shadow of Richard Sharpe. To understand Hakeswill, we must first start with what made him such an odious scumbag. Hakeswill is known to have been born somewhere in England, in a settlement whose name ends in Dale. His mother's name was Biddy, and whilst his father is unknown. Biddy died when Obadiah was 11, and it is stated repeatedly in the novels that he worshipped her. Obadiah and his mother were very poor, and both likely engaged in stealing and other feral antisocial behaviour in order to survive in a world with few job opportunities for women and no programs to help poor children with little hope for a future. Some claim that Obadiah Hakeswill was destined for villainy from the very start. At the age of 12, he tried to assault the daughter of a vicar, threatening her with a snake to make her undress. Now, in the Sharpe's Company novel, it is careful to note that no rape actually occurred, only that the boy forced her to strip under threat. Now, whether this story holds any truth is another matter entirely. It is somewhat difficult to imagine a 12-ish-year-old boy successfully brandishing a poisonous snake without getting bitten himself. And as far as we know, Obadiah Hakeswill wasn't exactly fluent in Parseltongue. At the trial, however, to protect the vicar's daughter's reputation, he was actually convicted with stealing a sheep. This, however, was a death penalty offence at the time, fated to die by hanging. In the novel, it is also made clear that the vicar did despise both Obadiah and his mother, and as his mother died a year before this, he probably was rather glad to be rid of him. On the day of the execution, he was hanged with several other men. Obadiah should have died from this, however it was botched and he survived. A rainstorm occurred which dispersed the crowd, allowing his uncle to cut him down from the gallows and tell him to flee. Although he survived, the noose damaged Obadiah irreparably. His neck was scarred from the rope, and he was left with a severe facial tic. Psychologically, he was left with an overinflated opinion of himself, thinking that he was immortal, unable to die, and chosen by God. Obadiah did as his uncle suggested, and fled south. Sometime after this, he enlisted in the British Army's 33rd Regiment of Foot, initially serving as a drummer boy. He eventually rose to the rank of sergeant, in part thanks to his dedication to foot drill and military duties in sight of officers. Away from the officers, however, he was, in essence, a holy terror, bullying the men under his command, even threatening to have them flogged if they didn't let him sleep with their wives or surrender their possessions to him. He would make up some imaginary offence to get them flogged. In the 1790s, Hakeswill was serving as a recruiting sergeant for the 33rd. One of the soldiers he recruited was the then 16-year-old Richard Sharpe. And, unlike every other soldier under his command, Sharpe actually stood up to Hakeswill, and he consequently became a reoccurring thorn in Hakeswill's side. thus leading into a very toxic relationship for the story to come. Now, in the novels, Obadiah Hakeswill's story begins in India, 1799 with Sharpe's tiger. By this point, he is already a seasoned sergeant, cruel, calculating, and perpetually seething at the insubordination of a young private named Richard Sharpe. He conspires with the commanding officer of their company, Captain Charles Morris, to have Sharpe framed for striking at Hakeswill, a crime that carries a sentence of death. This death sentence was 2,000 lashes of the whip, which is not the nicest thing to have done onto you, or even witness. These lashes would have killed him, if not for the army commander at the time, then Colonel Arthur Wellesley, obviously the future Duke of Wellington, halting the whipping after 202 lashes. Wellesley had a plan for Sharpe, using him and a commissioned officer, Lieutenant William Lawford, to pretend to be defectors, enlisting in the army of their enemy, the Sultan of Mysore. He must rescue senior British officer Colonel Hector McCandles, the intelligence chief in the British East India Trading Company. This is a very similar story somewhat to the Sharpe's Challenge TV adaptation. Hakeswill's hatred festers. When he discovers Sharpe and Lieutenant Lawford are pretending to defect to the enemy to rescue Colonel McCandles, Hakeswill betrays them to the Sultan's men. Essentially a scene we see in Sharpe's Challenge with Bickerstaff. He ends up imprisoned alongside Sharpe, McCandles and Lawford, all destined to be sacrificed in a grotesque religious ceremony. But when the others escape, they leave Hakeswill behind, assuming the tigers will finish the job. They don't, as the beasts have already eaten. And so, in one of the most morbid twists of fate that seem to define his existence, Obadiah Hakeswill cheats death for the first time, but not the last. Following Sharpe's tiger is Sharpe's triumph, and nothing about him has softened. By now, Sharpe's been promoted to sergeant, something Hakeswill considers an insult to the natural order. He teams up with Captain Morris again to frame Sharpe for attacking an officer, forging documents and recruiting a gang of soldiers to help him carry out his plan. But things don't go his way. Sharpe's rising star captures the attention of a now Major General Wellesley, who keeps him close, much to Hakeswill's disgust. Hakeswill fumes from the sidelines, trapped in the drudgery of the baggage train, while Sharpe and McCandles are out fighting real battles. When McCandles confronts him about the false charges, Hakeswill snaps, stabbing the colonel to death with a bayonet in the chaos of battle. And by the end, Sharpe earns a battlefield commission, rising to the rank of ensign. For Hakeswill, this is intolerable. His sworn enemy now outranks him. Nearing the end of the book, Sharpe leaves him behind, locked in a pen with an elephant. Yet, as we are very well aware, Hakeswill has a knack of surviving, this time by stabbing the animal in the foot. He next appears in Sharpe's fortress, and sinks even lower. Now attached to the corrupt Captain Torrance, Hakeswill makes a living through theft and extortion, skimming off the army supplies. When Sharpe uncovers the scam, Hakeswill and Torrance sell him as a slave, but Sharpe escapes, kills Torrance, and hunts down Hakeswill's accomplices. Cornered and desperate, Hakeswill deserts to the Maharatas, finding refuge in the supposedly impregnable fortress of Galgur, now under the command of another of Sharpe's enemies, William Dodd, we get a version of in Sharpe's Challenge. Sharpe's Challenge is essentially an amalgamation of Sharpe's Tiger, Fortress and Triumph. The two form a deadly alliance. When Dodd stages a coup against his superiors, Hakeswill gleefully joins in, personally murdering the fortress's commander, Benny Singh. But once again, Sharpe storms the fortress, scaling the unscalable walls, and brings the rebellion crashing down. Hakeswill tries to switch sides yet again, pretending he was loyal all along. It's the last trick Sharpe will tolerate, He drags him to a snake pit and forces him in. Somehow still, and impossibly, Hakeswill will live on. By the time of Sharpe's company, which is his next appearance, his survival has become somewhat of a dark joke. He resurfaces in the South Essex Regiment under the pretext of recruiting. One of his first acts is to attack Sharpe's lover, Teresa. She fights him off, knife in hand, and humiliates him publicly. But Hakeswill's pride is bottomless. Serving under Sharpe again, he immediately begins scheming, manipulating the inexperienced Captain Rymer, framing Patrick Harper for theft, and having him flogged. He even tries to murder Sharpe with Harper's own gun. When the British assault the fortress of Badajoz, Hakeswill seizes the chaos as an opportunity. He tracks Teresa down to her home, kills Sharpe's friend, Captain Robert Knowles, and holds Teresa and Sharpe's infant daughter, Antonia, at gunpoint. He plans to force Teresa to submit to him, but Sharpe and Harper arrive just in time. Harper tricks Hakeswill by pretending that the stolen portrait of another man's wife is actually his dead mother. The delusion overwhelms him, and he flees into the night, exposed and broken. The TV version of this novel is actually done quite faithfully, and Pete Postlethwaite's performance turned Hakeswill into something legendary. Appearing in Sharpe's company and Sharpe's enemy, Postlethwaite takes the character's madness and makes it frighteningly real. Every tick, every stutter, every whisper feels like it's bubbling out of a mind that's permanently on the edge. Back to the episode, he and Sharpe are reunited in Spain, where Sharpe had received a field commission and was now captain. However, this unfortunately was short-lived, as the political minutiae sent Sharpe back to lieutenant. Hakeswill delighted in making a point of reminding him of his new rank. As we see, he tried to have Perkins punished for losing a belt, but was stopped by Harper. He also frequently targeted Clayton, a soldier whose wife Sally he desired so.
I shall beat you every day until she comes running on her little plump knees begging me to have her. Oh!
During the assault on the breach of Badajoz, he charges in, but as the coward he is, he hides from the fighting under the corpses, crying for his mother. Once the British seem to be having the upper hand, he emerges to begin the looting, raping, and other atrocities that he can think of. However, the one atrocity he wishes is to find the house that Teresa is staying at. He follows Harry Price to Teresa, ultimately shooting him in the process. As he was about to get his way with her, he was stopped by Sharpe and Harper just in the nick of time. And in the same way we see in the novels, they aggravate him by spitting in the hat which he believes is his mother. This causes him to flee, escaping justice from Sharpe. However, this doesn't stop him from committing a rather unspeakable act. He rapes and murders Sally Clayton in order to take her small amount of money. After the events in Sharpe's company, we are in Sharpe's enemy, and now Hakeswill has gone completely feral. He joins a gang of deserters, terrorising the Spanish countryside, led by the Frenchman Portrayal. When they capture several women, including Sarah Dubreton, the English wife of a French colonel, and Sharpe's former lover, Josefina Lacosta. This, as we know, is changed in the TV adaptation to have Liz Hurley play Lady Farthingale, the wife of Sir Augustus Farthingale. After tricking Sharpe and Dubreton into fighting each other, having mistaken each other for deserters, Hakeswill and Portrayal collect the ransom. However, as is in the books, this only protects the women's virtue. Hakeswill, once again showing himself to be nothing more than a scumbag, initially forces Sarah Dubreton to reveal herself in front of Sharpe. However, Lady Farthingale takes the hit. Later on, Sharpe leads a group of riflemen in capturing the fortress, taking Portrayal prisoner and capturing or killing most of the deserters. But Hakeswill escaped with Isabella as hostage. As he escapes, he encountered Teresa and pointed a gun at Isabella to force her to lower her weapon. Hakeswill shoots her. In the chaos, Hakeswill attempts to have his way with Isabella Farthingdale, but he was promptly stopped and captured by Dubreton, who brought him back to Sharpe, along with Isabella and the dying Teresa. Looking at his old enemy tied up, Sharpe declared,
"A liar, a thief, a rapist, a murderer. That's not a man. Take it away."
Sharpe later watched from distance as Hakeswill was executed by firing squad. Yet he continued to desperately insist that he couldn't die, right up to the point the officer in charge finished him off with a pistol. I must admit to wishing that they still had Sharpe give the death shot to Hakeswill though. This for me was a disappointing change, as I really feel this would have completed Sharpe's arc in this chapter of his life. However, on the whole, for me, the performance by Postlethwaite is incredible, and one couldn't have asked for a better portrayal of this character on screen. He's not just a villain, he's an infestation, a man who slithers through the ranks, always watching, always plotting. Postlethwaite gives Hakeswill an almost theatrical intensity, quoting scripture as he commits atrocities, speaking to himself in two voices, and delivering lines with terrifying conviction. It's both a taunt and a ritual, a glimpse into the twisted religion he's built around his own survival. And what makes his portrayal work so well is also his restraint. He never becomes too much of a cartoon. He's pitiful as much as he is monstrous. You can see the paranoia in his eyes and the fear of death that drives his madness. Visually, the series amplifies this with the tight claustrophobic close-ups and erratic camera work that mirror his instability. This all reinforces the idea of a man who's decayed both morally and physically. In Sharpe's company, he embodies institutional cruelty. In Sharpe's enemy, he becomes something biblical, the devil wearing a British uniform, and his eventual downfall is as poetic as it is just. But when Hakeswill finally meets his end in Sharpe's enemy, it feels like a moment of justice, but not of triumph. His death isn't a grand victory, it's somewhat of an exorcism, a necessary purging of something vile that's haunted Sharpe since his earliest days. Because Hakeswill isn't just another antagonist, he's a psychological scar, the embodiment of everything Sharpe fought against. In that sense, Hakeswill is Sharpe's shadow. Both men were shaped by the same world, by poverty, cruelty, and the violence of the army. The differences lie in how they responded to it. Sharpe endured it and became stronger. Hakeswill absorbed it and became it. He's what happens when survival becomes corruption, and when discipline mutates into sadism. Pete Postlethwaite captures that transformation with unnerving precision. His performance doesn't just make Hakeswill terrifying, it makes him believable. The constant twitching, the whispered prayers, the sudden bursts of venom, they all feel like outer symptoms of a man eaten alive by his own trauma. You can just see it in his eyes. And that's what makes Hakeswill such a potent symbol within Sharpe. He represents the rot beneath the glory, the side of the British Army that history books tend to forget, the corruption, the brutality, and the exploitation of men like Sharpe by men like him. From a storytelling perspective, Hakeswill arc is the cornerstone of the early Sharpe saga. His conflict with Sharpe gives the series its emotional spine. The battles with the French are grand and heroic, but it's the personal war between these two men that feels most real. As a villain, Hakeswill stands alongside the greats. He's not defined by power and ambition, but by sheer malignant survival. A man who refuses to die, until finally he does. And even then, it feels like the world hasn't quite rid itself of him. Pete Postlethwaite's portrayal ensures that Obadiah Hakeswill remains one of British television's most haunting creations. There's a reason why we still talk about him decades later, because he represents something timeless. And in the end, Hakeswill is unforgettable, not because he's just monstrous, but because he's human. A mirror of the worst parts of us, warped by pain, fear, and the relentless machinery of war. And perhaps that's why he remains, to this day, Sharpe's most enduring villain. Thanks for watching this video. Please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel grow. And let me know in the comments your thoughts on Hakeswill as a character. Did you prefer his novel version or the TV adaptation of him best? Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you over the hills and far away.